Hello, 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 everyone. This is Rebecca again. I am so sorry, uh, but this is a repeat recording of the um, class or the group session that we had the other day. Um, I forgot to press record. So sadly, there were a bunch of people who weren't able to make the group, and the notes aren't really enough. So I'm going to go over the stuff that we went through on that day. And I hope that the Spirit of the Lord will just minister to each of you. And as we're going through things, you may have some questions. Please feel free to send those to me at our info or our media account. It's always invictuskings.com. And we'll get back to you, or we'll include them in our next session. So we'll start off, and it's quite a thing to explore this. And I even wonder how on earth we can explore it really well, because it's a new concept, this missionary prophets, in a way. It's a fresh twist, I think, or a look at something that's old. And speaking about it, I think, can cause both positive and negative reactions in people. I've had both. It challenges our entrenched views about the traditional roles within the missionary landscape, within the church landscape, and even within the prophetic landscape. So the notion that all missionaries must fit the mold of apostles or evangelists seems increasingly outdated in today's diverse culture. And we must recognize that the landscape of mission work is evolving, just like everything else is around about us, at an incredible speed. And it may not resemble, when we come and land somewhere, it may not resemble, well, it won't resemble what we once knew. So God is actively reforming and reshaping, recalibrating each one of us to align with his purpose in this swiftly changing world. And I think that we need to critically assess everything that confines us to rigid definitions of Christendom, which can actually hinder our ability to embrace a kingdom perspective. And by taking the risk to do that, to critically assess things, we create space, I believe, for meaningful transformation. God is rewilding his landscape. The earth belongs to the Lord, and everything within it is under his authority, and that includes mission work. So the definitions are his as well. And recently, I felt this compelling invitation to explore the realm of missionaries, but in a way that is quite unique and not often discussed. And while I know this concept, and probably also the conversations about it exist somewhere, I have yet to encounter the idea of missionaries who are also prophets, or vice versa. It's just not talked about. But to me, it makes complete sense. Wherever in the world you go and the church is being established by the making of disciples, there should be and hopefully are apostles, prophets, pastors, evangelists, and teachers. They may not know that's who they are, but they're there because Christ gave them to the church. It was no surprise then when shortly after I began sharing my thoughts about this, someone pointed out that missionaries are akin to apostles like Paul. And I agree, some are. But that was sort of their understanding about that you're either an evangelist or you're an apostle. However, I think that this is just the beginning of a much larger narrative. This it's not a class. I keep wanting to call it a class. It's not. This group session. So my entire life, for those of you who don't know me, has revolved around mission work. I grew up in a missionary household. I spent my formative years, well, all my years until university, on a mission compound, and I attended a missionary boarding school. And overall, my experiences as a missionary kid were positive. While I did struggle with boarding school, um, that's something that many missionary kids can relate to, but not all. It's important to note that my dislike for it isn't a reflection of my upbringing or my parents' dedication to their mission or their call. And it wasn't because of them that I didn't like boarding school. I could have been raised in a household that had nothing to do with mission and been sent to boarding school, and I think I would have still disliked it intensely. So it's nothing to do with my upbringing. I had a great upbringing as a MK, a missionary kid. So it's essential, I think, as we begin this conversation, for us to establish some definitions. But I believe the definitions need to remain somewhat flexible. So as we embark on any journey that God calls us to, many aspects begin to define themselves. Many aspects of what we think we're doing, they begin to define themselves. And we often find ourselves, at least this has been my experience, trying to keep pace with what God is creating. Fortunately, he is generous of heart, and he provides us very often with a starting point, which is something that we as humans truly require. So let's look at some of these definitions. A missionary. A missionary is an individual dedicated to spreading their faith and values, often traveling to different regions to share their beliefs and to provide support to communities. They engage in various activities, including education, healthcare, social services, that kind of thing, aiming to uplift and empower those they serve. In our case, as Christians, discipling those around them in the faith, enabling spiritual growth, as well as all those other activities that we were talking about just now. Their commitment often transcends cultural and geographical boundaries. So making a significant impact on both the lives of individuals and the broader society wherever they go. Sometimes they move to a nation, or they move to a region or a different town or city, which helps them in changing atmospheres and affecting culture, Christian culture and otherwise. And sometimes they come and they go to a place. I think the big emphasis here is on long-term commitment rather than the idea of I'm popping over for a weekend and delivering my goods and then leaving again. You cannot be a missionary these days, I believe, without long-term investment in a people or a place. And this is what separates you from being someone who is missional. It's true, there are short-term missionaries. They often go for a specific time period of a couple weeks. And I would tend to class those mission trips in the missional category, although many who do this kind of trip find that it is something that plants a seed in them for their future. So you could start off with this missional kind of intention, and it changes and grows just as you do. Because we're talking about prophet missionaries, it's important to note that they will not just go with the sole purpose of leading people to Jesus, but as prophets, they will carry the desire to make disciples, which is a very different thing. They will look for and train the national people of a land in the various gifts of the Spirit, particularly the prophetic, revelatory gifts. They will nurture the prophets. They will teach and train them. They'll bring them to maturity so that they can take responsibility for their own land. They won't be going in to establish themselves. They'll be there to pour into the people of a nation, to serve them so that they can be who they're meant to be. So these missionary prophets will display quite some disdain, I think, for what the prophetic has become in the West. Very often, not always, but very often a platform grab. And they will take on that form of a servant like Jesus did and serve the ones that the Lord loves. Very often the least of the brethren. It's hidden work most of the time with very little accolade. And this is one reason I believe that prophet missionaries feel they do not fit into the regular prophetic scene and why people who are prophets without the missionary call or mantle do not know how to make a place for you who are called to be missionary prophets. And we want to talk about this and obviously see if we can, at the very least, here in groups like this, encourage one another going forward so that we do not feel isolated, so that we can have a more clear understanding of who we're called to be and what we are called to do as missionary prophets. Now let's just look at this term missional. This term is broader, and the term mission has been used throughout the work world for years now, and it encompasses a mindset or approach to living out one's faith, because we're Christians, in Christianity, and purpose in areas that are not Christian. And I believe that we are all missional just because we are Christians. That goes without saying. So of course we can all be missional with a prophetic edge. I think you could fit things like prophetic evangelism into this category, because that is something that should be going on every day of our lives in the most natural way. We are all on mission, so to speak. Missional emphasizes the idea that all Christians are called to participate in God's mission in the world, not just those who are formally identified as missionaries. So anyone who knows their specific purpose for a season or even the week ahead could be considered a missional prophet if you're in tune with what the Lord is saying and doing. Being missional involves integrating your faith and outreach into daily life, focusing on the community that you encounter day by day, focusing on your local culture, and sometimes including social justice and service as part of that mission. If you read the Gospels, it's full of that. So in summary, missionary typically refers to individuals actively engaged in very specific mission work, often involving a move locationally, but not always. Remember, God is reforming the way we look at things and the way we understand things, while missional refers to a philosophy of living that emphasizes participation in God's mission wherever one is. And if you're still confused about definitions, you're not alone. Many people, many of us, get caught up in the need to have everything perfectly understood or organized. Unless all those ducks are in a row, I'm not going or getting involved. However, if that's your mindset, you might struggle in a missional or a missionary setting. The neat and tidy definitions that work back home will not serve you well in the field. Instead, your new mantra should be, as you go forward, it should be to adapt, adapt, adapt. It's one thing to visit a city or country as a prophet delivering a message and then leaving. It's entirely another to relocate, to commit to long-term engagement and build meaningful relationships with the people God has called you to serve. And the difference is significant. I've done both. It's significant. We're discussing a distinct type of prophet to the nations. We hear that phrase all the time. Everybody reckons they're called a prophet to the nations these days. So it's an idea. It's a type of prophet that transcends the notion that many of us have of becoming a renowned itinerant minister of the gospel. And it's essential to understand and to embody and share a gospel that is truly worth dying for. If you're going to be a prophet to the nations, not just a superficial sacrifice. This is not about seeking personal fame or recognition. This will not make you rich or bring you into a life that is always comfortable. However, embracing this calling will fill you with profound joy, I believe. And I believe that joy is one of the reflections of God's glory. And we're going to see it more and more as we step into this area of prophet life. Now, it's essential to revisit certain points because understanding them is crucial. So if you hear me repeating things, it's purposeful. because you're going to encounter challenges and questions from other people. So having a general sense of these concepts can be beneficial. So that's why you're going to hear things repeated. However, keep in mind as well that we're in a transformative period and God is reshaping how we represent the kingdom. It's perfectly acceptable not to have all the answers, and it's perfectly acceptable to seek clarifications, to ask questions. One of the key insights I gained as a prophet is that embracing uncertainty and admitting that I just don't have the answers at times is not only acceptable, but it's a vital part of your prophet journey. Now, I know many of you could have been trained that as a prophet, you should always have something to say and always have an answer. Just unlearn that, will you? Your life speaks without you having to say a word at times. So just unlearn that you have to have an answer and get on that question train, because if you do that, you will grow. So let's break down the role of a missionary prophet a little bit here. As missionary prophets, our primary mission is to share our faith and educate, train, make disciples, disciple individuals in the principles of Christianity. But we also have the vital task of identifying those who may possess a prophetic calling. It's our responsibility as prophet missionaries to nurture and equip these individuals, empowering them to embrace their divine purpose and manage the territories entrusted to them by God. By God, it's their land. And this is so important. Our role is not to dominate or reshape the land according to our desires. Our job is to do what I call mining for profit, but we are mining for profits. However, we're called to love and to serve and to equip the local communities and prophetic communities that we engage with. And by doing so, we help them to mature in their faith, enabling them to take ownership and to actively participate in the ministry work that lies ahead. And how this will look or how it will work itself out will vary significantly from one individual prophet to another, influenced, of course, by the unique qualities and characteristics that each prophet has. We are all different. We're all distinct. We are not mere copies of one another. Thank goodness, right? So let's consider the practical aspects of the role of a missionary. The easiest approach to being a missionary might be to adhere to conventional models, but doing so could cause you to forfeit the prophetic vision and the divine insight that God intends to utilize in our time. He's bringing this to the forefront for a reason. There's a purpose that God is emphasizing missionary prophets. The role of the missionary, again, is primarily to spread our Christian faith and its teachings to individuals and communities who may not be familiar with them. And this can involve a range of activities. So it leads to a bunch of questions like these ones. How does a prophet do evangelism? How does a prophet work at community development? How does a prophet resist personal preference when speaking into cultural situations which make them feel uncomfortable? How does a prophet gain and then manage crossing into other cultures and serve them from the outset instead of trying to change them? How would a prophet begin to church plant? How would a prophet missionary provide support to local leadership and resist the man of God or woman of God titles that so often follow missionaries around in developing nations? Oh my goodness, we have encountered that so many times in so many places. We've been called women of God, daughters of God, prophetess so and so, on and on and on. And the last time I was out on the field, it was daughter of Zion or daughters of Zion. It's just hilarious. But how do you resist that? Because that's not a godly model. And there's things attached to that. That yes, it's how they honor you, but there are things that are attached to it which are false and not good. Anyway, these are questions to ask. So overall, prophet missionaries aim to make a positive spiritual difference, a social difference, and often a material impact on the communities that they've been sent to serve. Of course, inspired by the life of Jesus Christ and his disciples who left everything to follow him. They rise to the call of God on their lives and the anointing that he has given them to make a difference. And there will be, or needs to be, inside of them a burning desire to mine for those prophets wherever they go and to raise them up to be like Jesus in their calling, not like a denomination, not like a church, not like a certain ministry, but to be like Jesus. We've lost our way in that quite a lot, I believe. But God's recentering us. So now let's look in the Bible just a little bit. Even though in scripture prophets aren't specifically called or entitled missionary prophets, we can see that from some of the prophets we can see from their lives that they actually were. Let's just look at Moses, for example. So you can read about him in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. He's there everywhere. And Moses is often considered a missionary prophet due to his pivotal role in leading the Israelites out of Egypt and his dedication to guiding them towards understanding and worshiping one God. As a prophet, his mission encompassed several key aspects. And so he is often referred to by many as a liberation leader, renowned for his pivotal role in the Exodus, where he brought the children of Israel, he guided the children of Israel out of their enslavement in Egypt. And this journey wasn't merely a physical escape. It was a profound spiritual liberation that they were invited into. Upon entering a new land, they were presented with countless opportunities to thrive and to live in abundance with God's will. They were. Unfortunately, though, they made poor choices, resulting in a 40-year wandering in the wilderness. Nevertheless, Moses fulfilled his divine mission. He boldly proclaimed prophetic truths to those in power, demanding Pharaoh to let my people go. There's that famous saying that echoes down through the ages. And as modern day missionary prophets, we can draw invaluable lessons from his courage, from his unwavering persistence, even when he wobbled, and his steadfast commitment to obeying God, even in the face of daunting challenges. So let's go a little further. The prophet Moses, he acted as a go-between God and the children of Israel. He was the one chosen by God to receive and then handle the communication of the 10 Commandments and the law. He climbed Mount Sinai. I always say that wrong. Anyway, he climbed Mount Sinai, making sure he was set apart for God to hear well. And from that, we see his function was to talk about the conditions really of God's word as it related to God and the Ark of the Covenant. His mission call in this place was to be the one who communicated that there was only one true God. He stood for a monotheistic religion, which, if you have any experience in the world of missionaries, is something you have to be very clear on and firm on, because there are shrines everywhere. People are worshiping all sorts of things in secret, and you have to have sharp discernment, and you have to be able to teach about one true God. Moses, again looking through the lens of a prophet missionary, knew his job was to teach and train about the law and the commandments. And out of these, there would be good foundations for building a community. A community that today we would think of as one being built around the person of Jesus and then his word. So Moses was the standard setter, not just in religious law of the day, but in morality. And this fits in perfectly with what I see as the role of the prophet missionary today. Moses was a guide, what maybe some would today call a mentor. So he mentored not in the one-on-one way that we often do now, but through the things he taught and in his life. And in my experience, this is one of the most powerful ways to enable growth and to make disciples who are solid and firm and able to carry prophetic weight and responsibility in the land. Prophets spend much time being frustrated with evangelists over this issue of who is going to disciple all of those who give their lives to Jesus. Because evangelists need to have numbers and lots of, a head count. And that just drives prophets crazy. Probably drives other people crazy too, but I can't speak for them. But I believe that this actually is a prophetic role for us to step into. Not necessarily for those who are not prophets, but you cannot expect an evangelist or a pastor to raise up prophets. So you need to consider what you're going to bring to the table. We are called, I believe, by God to reproduce after our own kind spiritually. And this is something missionary prophets need to deal with. And so instead of losing precious energy to frustration, we need to use God-given strength and the anointing to do exactly this, to make disciples, to mentor prophets, using the gifts, the revelatory gifts, to bring insight and instruction that only the prophet can bring. You can't expect and the other gifts and callings to raise up prophets. You do it. There are other prophets in the Bible that we could look at their lives, but for the sake of time, I'll just mention their names. There's Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Jonah, and then in the New Testament, of course, there's Paul, who was an apostle, but he was very much a missionary too. I never, ever have heard in all my life people teaching about the missionary aspect of these prophets. And I have not taught on missionary prophets ever before. This is a fresh, not new, because there's nothing new under the sun, but for me, it's a fresh area. And I'm excited to be going on this journey with God and with each one of you. A while back, I had a dream which included quite a bit that had to do with this subject of missionary prophets and what I believe God is up to with us. I dreamt that I saw a group of people. I knew all of them. One of them I was surprised to see because he has struggled with illness. But as I looked back on his life, and this was an afterthought as I was going through what the dream could mean, I remembered that he had for years been a missionary and served with several organizations. And I realized that his illness began when that season seemed to be over with him. Anyway, we were in an outside context, in a landscape that was not Western. Anyway, I watched as all of these people piled into a Mission Aviation Fellowship plane and took off. I did not like it that I was not on the plane, because everybody knows how I love being taken somewhere in a MAF plane. Any plane, actually, but a MAF plane is very special. That the man I recognized as ill who got on the plane and went, that indicated to me that there are many missionary prophets who have not known where they fit, and they have pain over that: physical pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain. And I believe that by going again, God was showing me that this is going to bring healing to this area. Many of you have experienced rejection from traditional missionary groups, and God is going to do a work there. There's pain there. It may take time, but God is faithful. He's going to bring healing into this whole missionary prophet area. The other point of it all is that I was left standing on the runway and was obviously seeing these people off. I was a sender. in this situation. And this to me is a part of what God is calling us to be as an organization, and not on our own, but in collaboration with other organizations. We actually cannot do something like this on our own. It's going to take the recognition of this as a legitimate call and need by more than just one prophetic group. And so I'm going to stop with the teaching and go over, have a look here at these notes from the summary. And we went into a time of questions and people sharing their stories. I just want to say that I know this kind of thing that we're embarking on won't be smooth sailing or easy, but it's going to be fun. And God has strategies and ideas that we are only now beginning to be open to. And so my thought about that is to just say to the Lord Jesus, lead on, lead on. Take us where you want us to go, and help us to understand what it is that he's asking of us. So just to recap, we've talked today about the concept of missionary prophets and their role in spreading the Christian faith and how the different adaptations need to take place in our lives culturally and all sorts of things. We've talked about long-term commitment being necessary, and the nurturing of local prophets and working with local apostolic ministries. That's how we do that. When we go, we work with people on the ground. We've put a lot of time and effort into developing relationships, trustworthy relationships, and yeah. So that's sort of been our thing today, and it was the other day. I've probably missed out a few things that I just added in, but I can't remember, to tell you the truth, what they were right now. But our next steps are just going to be, we're going to have another meeting on Saturday, next Saturday. And Heather is arriving in Canada later this evening. Well, she is in Canada. She's in Toronto right now. But we are going to talk about, when she gets here, what our next steps would be in this missionary prophet initiative. And I think it's up to all of you participants to reflect on what your personal calling is and what your willingness is to share, what level and how you want to live your life out as a missionary prophet. And we're going to be working on developing frameworks and structures as God gives us his ideas of how to support missionary prophets. And I think all of us need to see how that's working in our lives right now, whatever context we're in. And we're going to explore potential collaborations with other organizations to support missionary prophets. I think this is something we have not done. We've not seen it as a need. And God has put his finger on this. And so that is important for all of us to think about. Okay, I'm just looking for some of if there were any question. We had some, Nigel Reed was on the show, and we had some really good conversations about cross-cultural dynamics, that kind of thing, and the challenges of translating cultural nuance and that kind of thing. And so it was really good to have him there, because he carries this as well in his heart. Let's see. Yeah, it's sort of hard to, the questions aren't written down here that people asked about, but some Crystal shared, she's preparing for a mission to YWAM, so we talked with her a little bit about that. And we talked about the step-by-step approach, discovering how we discover what God's long-term plan that is for us, and how we step out in what he shows us, and then he opens things up. Pauline asked a question about how this works with people in your local area. So we talked a lot about that, and we talked about intercession and how important that is. And we had Carol Betts jump in and give us some guidance about that, and how the Invictus intercessory team, how they support us and how we work together with them. We have an incredibly vibrant and robust intercessory team who we work very closely with. And this is so important. We talked about how important it is that we come as servants and not high and mighty prophetic people, especially in nations, for example, in some of the developing nations in Africa and other places too. The prophetic has been modeled so badly. There's just so much corruption and so much money grabbing and people having to pay. The prophets are big and mighty famous people, and they come with entourages and bodyguards, and it's ridiculous. It's shameful, and that is not what a true prophet of the Lord looks like or functions like. And so I think I'm remembering now getting quite steamed up over that subject, and the longing for prophetic ministry, missionaries, prophet missionaries, to come and bring that purity of what a Bible-based prophet is, not one of these twisted, corrupt expressions of what man and sometimes the church has made a prophet to be. David from Estonia was talking about what they're doing there and developing a community center. And we talked about the need for prophet missionaries to remain faithful. I was just listening. This is an add-on to someone talking about how the difference between a CEO of a prophetic ministry or a church and a CEO pastor type, and then one who was not that, and the difference being that one is going after success and the other one is going after being faithful. We tend to want to hang our hat on the faithfulness hook. We talked about the importance of surrendering to the will of God, and how we actually can't do anything unless we are willing to do that. He is the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords. And yeah, I'm going to stop there. This is a very shortened version of what we went through on Saturday. We missed you. I'm sorry that I didn't press record, but this next Saturday, I will do that, guarantee. So God bless you all, and we'll see you on Saturday.